If you see the recommendations that we had given recommendations at 3 levels.
So we are not sort of chasing the tools or the deliverables from the get-go, because the process is more about understanding the challenge and the context first, and then figuring out a
Hey guys, I'm Junaiza Niazi, author of Navigating Service Design, and joining me is the incredible Sharan Longani, an aspiring service designer. Together, we are on a mission to connect you with the brightest minds practicing service design. In today's music, we have Swara and Nikita, founders of Zenoco Labs Consulting. So, Zenoco Lab is a service design and social innovation company. They have done projects in the domain of contextual research, business innovation, design strategy, to name a few. And some interesting projects, as an example, that they have worked on is one, understanding nutrition and food habits for women and infants from urban slums in India. So that was a research heavy project that they had done. The second example of a project that they've been working on is a service design project where they design services for fintech and financial inclusion for rural Indian population. But apart from the amazing work that these guys are doing, they are constantly sharing their learnings with the community and the world. They have recently published Social Sustainability in Tech report. This report is an output of extensive research of 6 months and conversation with global thought leaders from tech, design, research domains. I will add the link to the report in this podcast as well. And the learnings were also published in the Touchpoint magazine. And not just reports, they're consistently sharing their thoughts as speakers across various conferences, such as the Service Design Network, True Research 2023, Design Matters Mexico, UX Lighthouse, QRCA. It's an American Research Association. So these are some of the places that these guys are constantly sharing their learnings. But today they're going to be sharing a specific project and their ground learnings with us, and we're really excited to be learning this from them. So thank you so much for joining us, guys.
few.
Actually, just like listening to it, it just sounds very humbling.
You guys did a fantastic job. So I didn't know what to include, what to exclude. Otherwise, it will take 30 minutes for me to just introduce the work that you guys are doing. That's why I had to choose the projects.
Thank you so much.
Yes, thanks a lot. I'm glad that we can now add this to the list of communities that we contribute to. I think what we've always heard consistently across all conferences that we've gone to, especially the global ones, is how much the Indian perspective on service design is, or cultural insights from India are valued, because I think similar to our experiences in India, where we feel like most case studies come from either the US or Europe, I feel like audiences there also feel similarly. So every time we present our work, our case studies, or our learnings, it's so valued and well received because of how because of such a unique like cultural context, and how are we applying the same sort of tools, practices, or what are some cultural ideologies also in India that make the whole, or that impact the process or consumer behaviors. So that is always quite well received.
What is the role of frameworks and tool, and how do you bring in the cultural learnings and still leverage these tools? How do you guys go about it?
We take at it as a, I would say, like an intention that we need to follow that, or it's sort of like an output that we could aim for, but doesn't mean that we need to go through that entire process using that exact particular tool. So for example, even if we are saying that service blueprint is something that we want to design and we want to come up with, so that's an intention that all of us are working towards at the end of the project. But throughout that entire project, sometimes literally trying to build that blueprint along with the users and stakeholders sometimes doesn't work.
Let's go through a phase of a project, and that might be easier for us to even discuss how do you guys leverage these tools but still get a cultural context. In the first phase, when you're doing your research or when you get a project, so how do you exactly leverage these tools? Like, what do you essentially tell your clients this is the output going to look like? Or are you going to say that, hey, service blueprint and journey map are deliverable? How do you guys essentially start that conversation and discuss what your deliverable would be?
Yeah, I think that's an interesting question. What we tend to do again and what this is also what we've learned over a course of time is also that service design or the process essentially is not about the tools per se, right? It's about the challenge that we are chasing or the problem that we are trying to solve. So what is going to aid us to do that? And then we figure out what tools are the best. Now, whether that comes from the array of tools that we all are familiar with, or do we need to create one, is a separate question. So we are not sort of chasing the tools or the deliverables from the get-go, because the process is more about understanding the challenge and the context first, and then figuring out, okay, what do we need to get the answers or get to where we want to, and what is going to help us do that. So when we speak with our clients also, we are starting the conversation more from understanding the context first, and once we do that, then telling them, okay, this is the path that we're going to take now, or we are now going to build such and such tools, instead of promising that from the get-go. For example, the project also that we very recently wrapped up, we took a significant amount of time just to understand what are the goals, what are the things that the product concepts that we were calling it were. Basically, they were financial products of sorts, 14 different kinds. So we were trying to understand each of those product concepts separately and understand the goals for each. And then we were able to define, okay, so if these are the goals, and this is the kind of testing that we need to do for the product concepts, so we're going to build this and that for it. And then we ended up coming up with like 3 different types of visual stimuli that we required to build to be able to test those, because each of them had some sort of differences in the goals that we were trying to achieve. So that is usually the path that we take. And in the case study also that we're going to talk about more deeply later, we did build a journey, but that came in like later in the process as we were working in the weeds of it, because we felt like a journey is going to be a great way for us to sort of pull this information together and understand the context better. So therefore, we didn't even sort of imagine that or promise that in the beginning. It was something that comes out of the process and the need of what we're trying to do and achieve.
These clients reach out to you. Do they have a certain expectation, and what's the discrepancy between you doing the contextual research and then coming out with your own outcomes? So I think it's quite a mix for us, where we have had some clients where they come with a very narrow and a very specific requirement and very specific need, that we want to create a dashboard, or we want to create a particular app or this particular service, very very deliverable oriented or very output oriented. Whereas some clients, which are like our ideal and favorite client, who come to us with the context and the broader level goal that they want to achieve, which is that I want to increase stickiness of my service, or I want to increase efficiency of my employees. So those are like bigger goals that they want to achieve. And then a dashboard or a product or a service or an ecosystem intervention becomes different ways for you to achieve that broader goal. So whenever any client comes to us, irrespective of which type they are, we always push them to take a step back and try to understand what are you trying to achieve. So I think thinking from that macro perspective helps us in understanding where are we heading. That gives us a lot of flexibility in terms of ideating and being creative around the process that we can follow, or the tools and the stimuli that we can create. And throughout the process, of course, like it's not always comfortable for clients to be so open-ended, because they want to know that what am I going to get at the end of X amount of number of months, and then so much of money is been going to be spent. So they need that predictability. So that's why we try to understand those broad level goals at a very like a quick manner when we are at the kickoff level. So our typical way of going about it is that we go from macro to micro. So we go above from like, what is the business goal that you want to achieve? What kind of impact do you want to create? Then come to like, what is the consumer level impact? If we do research, then what is the goals for the research? What exact questions do we want to answer from the consumer? Then even come to micro, to the point of like, say, a product. If they have a digital product, then what kind of learnings do we want to have from that digital product, or what kind of product do we want to design? So we always try to understand the context, even if it's in a couple of hours workshop. Go from micro to macro to micro, and then once we get that clarity, then we try to build some level of roadmap for them.
So can you give us an example of a project? Let's start from what was the ask? How did you guys explore that ask? It's easier for us to relate to how did you guys navigate this entire space.
This one project that we did a couple of years ago. So it was with one of the Indian e-commerce platform. So why they had come to us was basically they wanted to. This was one of our like ideal project as well, because the client was really great in terms of setting expectations and working with us as we move forward in the project. So that also gave us a lot of flexibility and like creativity we could use actually to work with them and then reach to the goal that we wanted to. So they came to us with an agenda of redesigning their seller portal. So for being an e-commerce platform, like how all of us consumers, we use Amazon, Myntra, all of that as consumers. And when we place the order, there are like sellers sitting at the back end who are processing our orders. And then when we see that your order is being dispatched and shipped and delivered and returned, so all of those things, someone at the back end is doing it, who are sellers of those products, and hence we as consumers get those updates. So the goal was to redesign the backends, the seller portal, because they also have a portal that they operate. So that was the end goal, that we had to redesign the portal and the dashboard that the sellers were using. But the core reason for doing that was they wanted to increase the efficiency of the sellers, because from their data and their experience, they had seen that the sellers are they are the other platforms, their other competition. It could be like, say, Amazon, Myntra, like those kind of competitions. The same sellers are able to perform a lot better on the competition platform versus their platform. So they had seen that there was some lack of efficiency, and then they were feeling that it is because the portal is not as well designed. So that was the context that they came to us with. So how the process that we followed was, I think, a couple of challenges that we had. But being an e-commerce platform, there are way too many stakeholders who are involved in that entire process at the back end. So what we did was, we had a very, I would say, like a couple of days immersion session and a kickoff of sorts when we started the project, because we wanted our team to get completely immersed into the context before even starting and recommending anything, because it was a completely different world altogether. So what we did was that we tried to we had a multiple rounds of discussions and immersion sessions and kickoffs with very different stakeholders of the client side, because from even the client side there are like different teams, like logistics teams and order processing team and the grievances team and all of that. So there are like too many teams that they have. They all work in silos. Everyone have their own different relationship with the sellers, because if seller is facing any problem, they just call the client team and say, okay, this order is something is problems, or something is not being processed, and things like that. So our agenda was to understand how do these all stakeholders and teams work independently. So we try to understand their individual workflows, and then how do they work together as a company or as an ecosystem. How are these different stakeholders and their activities are connected? So I think we try to work and understand the context, that how do you work today? How does your work look like today? So that is where we started the immersion and the project.
But taking a step back, so the trigger for involving you guys was because of there were too many returns, or was there like delay for these products to reach the customer? Like, what was the trigger to for the person to be like, okay, this is a service issue, and we need people who can design the system for us, and not like a back end development issue, or what was that trigger?
Yeah, I think that is also to the credit of the client as well, to be able to identify that it's not about creating a jazzy looking portal. It's about analyzing where the gaps of efficiency are and what is the role that the portal is playing uh, in that, and then redesigning the portal based to address those gaps in efficiency. So what drove them was, the portal was quite old. Since they started, they'd not changed it, whereas the competitors had portals that came in or were designed much later, so we're also addressing to some of these gaps that they were facing, because they were one of um, the oldest ones. So I think there was also this push of seeing that from the competitors' side, and how well the sellers were able to perform there, and also feedback from the sellers, because the teams work very closely with them. So they could understand, they already sort of had an understanding of the challenges or the pain points in terms of how long it takes to process orders for them on the seller portal, how many orders are they able to process on this portal versus some other portals. And that is where they were noticing the inefficiencies, in the way that it takes them longer to do certain tasks on this portal versus somewhere else. And the delay leads to business impact for them, in the way that they're able to sell less, or they'll choose to put more products on another portal because they are able to process orders there faster or sell faster. So they were, shifting or moving to other portals because of that, or listing more products or inventory on other portals because of that. So they had, they already were aware of these challenges that the sellers were facing, so they wanted to address it.
Yeah, but it's interesting. They didn't say, oh, we need a product designer to redesign this seller portal, but they said, no, we need a service designer to tell us how can we make the system better. Because these kind of e-commerce platforms, you have BPOs, you have these business process managers who come in, set a process, and they're like, oh, we've done this e-commerce platform for so many vendors. There is a set process for it. Just take
Yeah.
that process and plank it there and just follow it. It's very
Yeah.
important that this client recognized that it has to be contextualized for his product or his service. So if you had to look back, where do you think that, or what was the attribute? Was he very consumer centric person due to which he realized, or a human centered design thinking person who realized that, okay, it's a usage problem or a systemic issue rather than a portal issue or a process issue?
Yeah, I think I would say it was a mix of both. The client and the contact point that we had from the company, I think he was a little quite aware in terms of human centricity and was curious to know about it and how can we improvise it. But also on the other side, the fact of e-commerce and the sellers is that it's not only digital touch point. Digital platform and the portal is one of the many touch points that all the stakeholders work with. Because imagine a seller sitting in like a few thousand square feet warehouse where are there like racks and racks filled with boxes of all the products. There are like 10-15 people working in the warehouse packing and labeling, and some courier guys coming to deliver. So it's a very multi-nodal ecosystem of sorts. So because it's like if you change one element, it's going to affect all of it. So I think they had realized and understood that is that even though they wanted to redo the platform, but they understood that in order to do that, even if I decide to change a step on a platform, there'll be some physical activity which will get affected. Because say for example, very logically speaking, when I as a seller, when I see an order on the platform, I go to the rack, I pick up the product, I pack it, and then I keep updating it on the portal. so that the consumer can keep getting updates of what's happening with the order. So if I'm changing any bit, this physical activity of picking up the product to sending and getting it back as a return is going to is going to affect in some way or the other. So this interconnectedness of activity and stakeholders and interdependencies was something I think they did understand and they had realized. And today, their teams were sort of working in their own ways in silos of sorts.
Right.
So I think somebody coming from outside looking at this holistically was, I think, something that they valued, because we would come with a fresh perspective. We wouldn't come with like biases of working in a certain domain for a long time. So I think that fresh perspective was also something that was definitely valued by them.
Yeah. And I think they also gave room to the seller's voice as well, which was also quite refreshing. It wasn't a case that we had to build in terms of, we need to understand the seller's challenges. It's something that they were already doing and wanted to do more of. So that also helps a lot, because they were not looking at speaking to the sellers or telling them how to do things, but listening to them to figure out what they need to change. So that having somebody who understands that from the get-go really helps in becoming one team and running with the service design or human-centered process faster as well, because you have clients who understand that. Through the whole process, they were not challenging the sellers with their experience or their challenges. They were very, very receptive of what the sellers were telling them and figuring out the best way to sort of address those challenges and gaps.
Very hard to find people who are even respectful of teams, because in general, I think, at least my experience working with very operation heavy systems, is that field teams are generally treated as, okay, we've told you to do this, you just have to do this. Hook or by crook, this is the system that you're following. And if we tell them that this is the issue, they would be like, hey, solve this issue, they will follow it. Just tell them, do it this way, they
Yeah.
have to do it this way. They can't change how they're doing it.
Unfortunately, we see it very less, but it's very important for the clients or like the service providers or the operational head to understand that people who are sitting in the field and working, maybe they have a lot more practical experience. They have a lot of experience of having worked with different companies, so they have a lot of comparative experience also. And then having been in the field for so long, they know the nuances very detailed, and which an operational manager or anybody else sitting back in the big office may never know.
Yeah. And something interesting that we had done for this project was also we had a co-creation workshop. So we invited the people from the sellers organizations who were working in the warehouse and operating the seller portal at the client's office, and different teams from the client's office who were working in silos and operating the seller portal separately for their own goals, all in one room to sort of ideate on how can we improve the seller portal, or what are their recommendations. It was a very creative co-creation exercise. And that was also so interesting to see, because again, there are these teams who speak to the sellers in silos. Then the knowledge sort of stays in a bubble, but is not, transferred or structured in a very organized way for them to act on it. So this was one place where you could hear all voices together and everybody coming together to solve different parts of the portal. And that was also so impactful for the client to be able to hear that firsthand from the sellers and understand what challenges they face, even though in their minds they might have structured something some way for some specific reason, but it's not how it's used, or it's not how it works out. So to hear it firsthand is very powerful.
Had prepared where you're getting in the field teams, the decision makers, everyone in that room, in order to hear each other's voice. Generally, in my experience, what I've seen is that a lot of ground workers or people who are lower in the entire org chart, they're not very vocal about their challenges, and they're not open to sharing what their issue is. Sometimes they don't even know that it's an issue because it wasn't seen as an issue in another company that they worked in. They were asked to work in a specific way, though they couldn't. So they think that's the norm. So they don't even know that that's a pain point that they have. So when they bring in service designers, at least personally, I think the trigger for the CEO or the decision maker is to get an external trigger to get them to share. Because if they went and asked them, hey, do you have any issue? They would be like, no, okay, fine. What were the tools or what were the triggers that you guys used to get them to open up, share that? How does that entire setup look like? Because that's a very challenging setup to do or a workshop to conduct. So how did you guys go about it?
Yeah, it's a great question because that does happen. It is the reality of how things work on the ground for sure. I think it is the job of the moderators and the researchers to be able to create a space where all voices are heard. So a lot of the onus for that lies on us to be prepared for it and to navigate it in the moment in the best way that you can. Whether that means to let go of the tools or the approach that you had in mind. So if that needs to be done, then it needs to be done. The more important part is that all voices are heard. And our client, at least the core team, was very on board and on the same page as us. Usually, we would need to do a bit of onboarding with clients to explain why that is important, how the moderator is going to try and do that. So to bring them on the same page. But in this case, the core team on the client side also shared the same mindset. So it was also very easy for us to have somebody on the client side also who would support us in being able to create that space. So if we were to change the approach, do something differently, or ask somebody to speak up or make them comfortable, then the client would also help us in doing that and supporting. So that really helped greatly. During the research also, like we said, we let go of the format that we had in mind. So if suppose we go in thinking it's going to be a one-on-one interview, but we see that it's difficult having conversations or it's difficult for them to open up, we just take a walk with them and tell them, show us around. And then we'll have the conversation while we're walking and they're away from the rest of the group, because also us going in a group is also sort of intimidating. So we sort of separate out into smaller groups or have like more one-on-one conversational chat. We've also initially taken journey maps to be able to map it with them or take notes on it, and very quickly realized that is tough to do because the focus from the conversation is shifted. They get intimidated by tools or more focusing on what we are writing, and also it's difficult for us to take notes in their houses while following them and having the conversation. So we let go of that as well, and we were like, let's just focus on the conversation and figure out how that data transfers to a map later as a homework for us later. But I think those kind of things really help us to be in the moment, to think on our feet, and also not be married to the tools or the process that we had in mind, but making sure that focusing more on the person that we wanted to speak to, and then ensuring that all voices in the room are heard. And like I said, having the client support on that also really.
Yeah. Just to quickly add to that is that to think on feet is also important for the moderator and the team designers who are going in field to be prepared for any kind of surprises, to be like exposed to any kind of surprises. Like as Swar said, like sometimes we think that it's going to be like one-on-one, but suddenly there are like 4 people from their team is just sitting, and then they are like, so it just ends up becoming a group conversation. Or we think that it's going to be like we'll ask them questions in the journey flow and we'll take notes in the exact step-by-step manner, but something just converts and then they start showing us like a portal and then how they use it, or like what problem they had today or what order they're processing. So things like there are a lot of surprises that happen you're not aware of, or suddenly in your plan, for example, certain part of the journey was supposed to be interviewed maybe in the next week, But when you are in the warehouse, that part of the journey is actually taking place in there. So you have to be ready to jump and say, okay, let me just do this because it's right there happening. It's the great context for us to observe. Like, for example, in the e-commerce platform context, if we went and said that, okay, today we are going to talk to the person who manages the orders, and next week we are going to do the logistics team, where how do they process the returns, how do they scan the QR code and all of that. But imagine that we go to the warehouse and the logistics team is just there and they're packing everything. So of course you want to observe and change your focus for that matter and then go there. So be okay to just be exposed to any kind of environments and surprises, and just ad hoc make changes as you need. And sometimes we service design also pushes us to be very collaborative. So we take our clients along with us for the research, so they are also exposed to the insights firsthand. That works great, but there are also chances that that works the opposite, because if we have the clients team with us, the sellers may not open up as well, because they feel that they have to say the correct things. Rather, they would open up to us a lot more openly. So then how do you strategically divide and conquer? Is that if there is this one clients person who is dominating on any kind, then how do you make sure that very strategically that person is talking to some person, or like a research is happening, but some other researchers just goes and does some observational study on their own, or talks to somebody else on the side. So how do you people manage the people? I think it's something that is very, very important as well.
Yeah, yeah. Because when you create a workshop or a space for a workshop, what at least as designers, a lot of the younger designers that I've worked with, they don't realize is that it's a lot of cost for the business as well. Because there are people from logistics team, people working who's supposed to be sitting and sending orders out, sitting in this workshop with you and trying to help set up that system so that outcome of that workshop should be really good. Otherwise it's not just waste of time, but it's a huge waste of money for their business as well. So when you're setting up that space, is there any kind of pre-prep that you guys do, or do you guys essentially be like, okay, let's keep it very open-ended, do a discovery phase, do a journey map with people together? How do you guys generally approach it?
Yeah, I think knowing when to have what kind of a workshop is also very important and needs to be strategically placed. The workshop in this case, we had it after we had built an understanding of the current workflow and validated that with each of the teams to make sure we're all aligned on it. Is this what your workflow looks like? Are these the gaps that you had discussed with us? And then we had taken the workflow into this workshop after that, and gotten people to ideate on the gaps that we had identified. Okay, how do we solve for these gaps now? And at the same time, there was not 100% reliance on only the ideas that come out of the workshop. So there's also an internal ideation that we would do then within our teams to build on those ideas, or with the clients discuss how do we want to prioritize and how do we want to build on those ideas. So there's not 100% dependence on the output of the workshop in terms of the ideas that come out and what we eventually decide to work on or build into the roadmap for the company. So completely agree that before you go into the workshop, it's very important that you yourself are equipped with the knowledge of the context, everybody's challenges and workflows, to be able to push those discussions further. Having those discussions in the workshop can also become very messy and complex and complicated. So again, figuring out when is the right time to do that, to be able to for the workshop to be really effective in as compared to the cost and the time in the effort that is going in versus the output, and also going in with a very solid structure for it and knowing what you're expecting out of the workshop. So that will also inform the tools that you're choosing, not having the workshop be very open-ended, but having some structure in place, taking some tools to work with, cue cards to work with, and also participating in the workshop yourself to hear what is coming out and be able to navigate the conversations as and when needed to be able to ensure that you're getting the output that you want to at the end of it also helps.
I'm just mapping your journey. You had a discovery phase where you were with the leaders, and then you had a research phase where you were looking at different stakeholders, how did they do all of this, and this is post your entire contextual research mapping phase that you guys have identified the gaps, and now you're ideating in order to how to use essentially find solutions to close these gaps, right?
Yes.
Okay.
So actually, this workshop came at a point where we had already undergone a couple of iterations of insights. When I say iteration, what we mean is that the workflow that we had built in the kickoff workshop session that we did, that was the current workflow that we had mapped of all stakeholders. So after we did the research, when we went to the research, we already had a background of what the current workflow looks like. So we didn't start from a literal blank slate.
Okay.
So after the research, we came back and we revised that workflow. So that workflow had already undergone one level of filtering in terms of what is working, what is not working, what are the challenges, what seems to be the opportunity, etc., etc. So that had already undergone one level of building a little bit of more conviction towards what we are learning. So based on those learnings and revised workflow, we built some tools. So if you see in the images, there were some cue cards, some probes that we had given, some activities that we had designed. So they were not very open-ended. They were not like literally from a blank slate. They were built based on the learnings that we already had. So if you see, we were like stacking up our learnings one top of the other. That helps in building conviction in whatever output happens in the workshop. So then this workshop came after the second iteration of the learnings anyways. And then we had some activities there where we had split people in groups, and each group was like a mix of sellers and the clients, stakeholders together, sitting and ideating how to solve a challenge. And then those problems or those white spaces that we had given to them were anyways based on the research and insights and learnings. So based on the output as well of the workshop, as Swar said, we tried to take the ideas as the intention that they were trying to solve instead of exactly how they told to solve. So if the user, if the seller is saying add this particular button to the portal, we are not taking it literally that they want a button. We are trying to understand why are they suggesting that idea, and then as designer later you build on that in different ways. So I think what workshops did to us was that just stacking up that learnings and these iterative learnings and like building on learnings at every step just make adds and helps us in getting a lot of conviction in what we are suggesting, and then that conviction helps in reducing the fear that you talked about, like how it's a lot of money investment also that the client is doing. So you need to have as much of stronger conviction as possible in the suggestion that you're giving, and these iterative process helps a lot of times in building that conviction many times.
Can the teams or the field teams, whoever it is, come up with new ideas, or does it have to be triggered through your secondary research or competitor research? Do you guys come with certain triggers so that they can come up with different solutions or suggestions, or do you guys just see how are they thinking about it? Like, what works from your experience?
I feel as I think Swar had mentioned, you need to be strategic at what point this workshop should come.
Yeah.
So depending on at what point the workshop is being taking place and why we are doing the workshop will define the question that you ask. So if the workshop is happening at a very early stage where you are a very exploratory, you just want to understand all possibilities without thinking or any practical challenges, business challenges, any of those filters, and just go all wild, all possibilities, then just having a very open-ended structure works for some workshops, and people do have some ideas. Of course, like you need to come up with you need to go with like some tools and stimuli that sparks some creativity in everybody's mind, so that you have to go with anyways. But depending on where we are conducting the workshop will define how focused the ideation needs to be. So if it's coming at a later point, like how for our case, it was almost after finishing 60% of the project where we had conducted this workshop. And we wanted it to be very focused, and that is why so much of structure was got into a place where we had, if you see, the workflows were mapped out, suggestions were mapped out, and then we were trying to answer some very specific questions with the workshop because we wanted to know what sellers feel about it. So depending on, I wouldn't say that there is one answer to this, but depending on, but I think the necessity is that we need to be clear why we are doing a workshop. It shouldn't be just because it's nice to have a workshop, let's do a workshop. So we need to know why we are doing, what do we want to gain out of it. So the output and the goal needs to be very clear. And when I say output, doesn't mean a workflow or a journey map. It's about what do we want to learn from that. What questions do we want to be answered from the workshop? And then, is the workshop the best way to do it? Should it be open-ended? Should it be structured? Should it be very specific? It all comes from that. So I think using workshop as a tool also, it's very important to know why we are doing it, and who should it be done with also. Because sometimes some ideations, like if you want to be very, very specific, then it's also sometimes great to do it only with a core team. But if you want to go like very all exploratory, then inviting as many diverse people as possible and stakeholders as possible maybe works. So I think it's a very tricky tool that everybody loves to do workshops, but it's important to do because we need to learn at the end of the day what we want to. Then otherwise it's just a waste of time and efforts for everybody if you don't do that.
Why did you all choose to do a workshop at the ideation stage and not much earlier at the research stage to understand the gaps? Like why later and not earlier?
I think we proposed that because we wanted a more in-depth understanding of the gaps, which we thought in the workshop, of course, there is value in having a lot of people in one room and discussing around similar themes, but then you can't get too in-depth with one team's workflow versus the other. You might get a holistic understanding of the context and the workflow at a higher level, but not an in-depth understanding of where exactly what is happening or what are the challenges at what specific point. The whole journey is quite complex, right from order processing until the return is processed, and there are a lot of permutation combinations and what can happen, what can go wrong, what happens with the label and things like that. So for us to be able to capture that in a workshop would have been very tricky. So we wanted to make sure that we're getting an in-depth understanding of the whole context and workflow of each of the teams before we do this workshop, to then be able to discuss things at a higher level or a bit more macro level with the understanding that we had of each of their challenges. Also, when they then ideate, we have an idea of where are they coming from or why are they asking for this, because we've had this understanding of the challenge that they're facing and what are they trying to solve. So it also helps us add context to the output or the discussions in the workshops.
Yeah, it's a complex project because there are multiple stakeholders involved, multiple processes that you guys are essentially suggesting to change. So when, let's say, you've conducted this ideation workshop, you have some buy-in that most of these verticals or divisions are open to taking your suggestions. Now, how do you essentially translate that into an output? One, but even before they actually change their systems, how do you show that these suggestions or these changes would add value? Guys, do any prototyping or anything to first evaluate if these hypotheses and suggestions could be adding value to them, or how do you guys go about translating these ideations?
Yeah, so this specific project, we had a very interesting way of mapping it. So through the workshop and then the internal ideation also that we all did, we sort of built one workflow for the seller portal then. It had different steps of the process that all teams and the sellers follow. Which team is doing what action at what point. So it sort of overlapped everything for the company to look at. So this is what it looked like in process. So it's broken down in the steps of activities that they are doing, which team is involved where, and what are the challenges that they face, which team is facing what sort of challenges, or the sellers at what point. So it helped us overlap all of these workflows that we were hearing about, to have one singular view of it and create alignment on it. Again, it does not need to be very fancy, right? This is done in Excel, so it's very scrappy, but it helped us achieve the goal that we wanted to at that point, to make it a working collaborative file for everybody to look at and add to it and say, is this making sense? Leave comments, change things. So it really helped us create that alignment. And then we added in the recommendations of, since this is the challenge, this is what we recommend in terms of design or business strategy recommendation. And in the bottom, we mapped a sort of impact that we imagine this would have. For example, if we are recommending that we need a section where sellers can access their performance reports easily, what is that going to do for them? So we have a section in the bottom that you see, the last sort of gray box that you see at the bottom of the map here. They are sort of impact metrics to evaluate efficiency, because that was the goal in the end, was to improve efficiency. So we looked at how is this going to help them save time, how is this going to reduce the dependency that they have on the client's team right now, because they were picking up the phone to call the teams to be able to solve their challenges, which is a dependency that they should be able to solve within the portal itself. So that is what we call dependency, and how it reduces the number of clicks that they need to do to be able to do a certain action or activity right now. So instead of a longer loop, how does it shorten their loop and the time that it takes for them to take an action on the portal? So each recommendation, it sort of mapped it to how does it help improve efficiency. This was done because we'd done thorough research and we had seen how they're using the portal. So it was easier for us to imagine that this is the current activity that they do, or this is the estimated time that it takes for them to do this exercise. If we change it to this, it's going to help reduce the time to so much. So we were able to estimate that because we've seen them sort of use the portal and go through this. So this was our way of doing it for this specific project.
So you didn't set it up or test it, or you didn't have to show the results of your suggestions. That, like you're saying that because you guys had a lot more context, you were able to say that this will definitely reduce your improve your efficiency. So we don't have to essentially test it or see if the suggestions are making sense for you.
So actually, we did design the portal as well. So the things like the dependency, the number of clicks, the time saved was something that was already tactically measurable based on the digital time.
Right.
So if you see the recommendations that we had given recommendations at 3 levels. One was design recommendation, which we could measure and already show them the impact. The second was business level recommendations, the opportunities that they can do at a business model level. And the third was operational opportunities. So we had already mapped opportunities more from a holistic perspective and not only what you can do on a screen.
Right.
So then based on those 3 levels of recommendations, they were also able to imagine the roadmap of working on those opportunities, because all the opportunities that we map, practically speaking, not all companies can implement it from a get-go. You have to prioritize. You need to see what are the low-hanging fruits, what you can tackle today versus what needs time and money and energy to do it later. So bifurcating opportunities at different level, one, help them in imagining what seems to be the very specific micro opportunity to macro opportunity, like a business opportunity, and how can we roadmap it from all of these opportunities, which seems to be like a low-hanging fruit, which we can quickly change and start seeing the impact. versus what can happen later. So road mapping also helped them in imagining. So
Yeah.
of both, like tangible opportunities were already mapped and impact was mapped, and some were given to them to think of in a roadmap format.
So the portal itself, you said you redesigned it, right? So
Yeah.
that was one touch point that you guys could have a direct impact. What about the operational opportunities? Is that something that you guys were constantly following up, or was it just a suggestion and it's up to them if they want to take it or not? How do you guys go about operational or process based opportunities?
So the operational and business model implications or recommendations are, of course, things that would happen at a management level and needs a lot of strategizing for the company to also know if they want to steer towards that. So it would happen down the line. So we had a lot of discussions with the management and the core team around it to explain where is this coming from, what kind of impact we can imagine this might have, so that we know that we're all aligned on the intent of it. And we sort of parked it in the roadmap for them to also imagine the impact versus the effort, and then for them to be able to decide when and how they want to implement it. So our main focus was then to chase the seller portal and the redesign of it, but have these strategic discussions on the side so everybody's aligned on where these came from and where can it lead to for them to then be able to take a call on whether they want to go towards it or not and at what point.
Yeah, because why I ask that question is generally operational changes or process changes. To get that to move, it's a lot of work and plus finding the right accountable stakeholder. That's where the entire challenge lies, because accountability nobody wants to take, because we're the ones who suggested these changes. So then
Yeah.
really we should be the ones accountable for making sure these changes take place. But then
Yeah.
transferring that accountability, how do you guys navigate that once you guys have suggested this? How do you ensure that, somebody's picking this up, at least trying it out in the future, so that whatever your effort is, your suggestions are, is actually driving those business outcomes? How do you do that transfer for the business opportunities and operational opportunities?
I think that is sometimes a limitation of a consulting or like consultants, where after a point we end up exiting the project. But from our side, what we try to do is that we try to it's just handing over something or handing over the accountability sometimes doesn't happen. It's a very human nature. So what we do is that we try to take the client and the core team along with us throughout the project. So it becomes their own project as well. They get invested in the journey. They start seeing the value of the things that we have heard, the kind of impact that is going to create. So it becomes not like us doing some kind of a work and identifying some great opportunities and giving it to them. Okay, now you do it.
Huh.
And as human nature, nobody's going to accept anybody else's ideas and say that I know my company better than you coming and telling me in 6 months' time. So of course, it's a very natural thing to happen. So that is why taking the client team, especially the core team, along with us throughout the project, trying to get them involved in the key milestones, or like all the iterations that we are doing, right from like the workflow that we built, the revised workflow that we built, the workshop that we conducted. So these are like key milestones. So making sure they are onboarded, we have a buy-in from their side. So all of these things generally help in the stakeholders believing in something that we have come up with towards the end. So even if not 100% gets carried forwarded, but they do see the value in what we have done. So it becomes like basically like make sure that it's not like our project, but it's like everybody else together we are doing the project. So they are more invested in the output.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Generally, when you have a product output, it's easy for us to close saying that, hey, this is the work that we did, this is our deliverable, it's something that is working for you guys. But when it's a process or an operational level project, how do you get that closure? Even if you're working in-house, that it's a question that even I've been asking, because you never get a closure for it. It's always an ongoing process. So how do you show the value that you have added So as a consultant, you have to figure it out much earlier. So how do you guys go about it if it was a purely operational or a business innovation project?
Yeah. I think metric for success for there is if they become champions of it. So, like Nikita was saying, that if we are able to create the same level of enthusiasm internally and understanding internally of what are we recommending, why, where does this need to go, even if it's high effort, why do we need to work towards it? Then we sort of have the belief in the faith that they also see the same value in it that we do and will commit to sort of taking it forward. But of course, the commitment does come with it's high stakes and it is like a slow steering ship. So it is going to take the time that it needs to. There's not much that we can do there, but at least our job is done in the way that we've not handed over just the workflow for them to make sense of it. We are available, we make sure that we present it, multiple times to the stakeholder groups that are necessary to have a buy-in from within the company. So even if that happens like a few weeks after the deliverable is sort of given or the end date of the project, we are more than happy to do that with our clients because we know how important it is. For them also to be able to build that commitment and enthusiasm within the company for what we've achieved or what are we recommending and build that buy-in. So I think that is also important for us to do, is that our job does not end with the deliverable. It's about creating a very thorough understanding and an equal ownership of what we've been able to achieve in the project. So not with what we've delivered, but what is the potential also of what can happen in the future. So at least that's what we try to do and aim for from our side.
Yeah, I don't think we have cracked it, but yeah,
Yeah,
we're trying to learn.
work in progress.
It's amazing, guys. I don't want to take up too much of your time as well. We've already taken up almost an hour of your time.
I had
But if people wanted to like follow your work, or because I know you guys document quite a bit, so how do they get to see your case studies or work or anything like that? Is it on the website, or how do essentially people get to learn more about the kind of stuff that you guys are doing?
We always feel like there's so much more documentation to be done. But
On Medium articles and also like sending things on LinkedIn and on the website and on YouTube. You guys are doing an amazing work at documenting whatever you very
there's always more to do.
Yeah, it almost feels it's not enough.
Yeah.
LinkedIn, Instagram are like the platforms that everybody can follow. We have a YouTube channel as well where we have some of the videos posted, or the kind of conversations we have had with different service designers have been posted there. Some of our old talks are there. But the latest work, latest updates from the team, all of it is generally updated on LinkedIn, Instagram, and our websites have some of the case studies which we definitely should add.
Yeah.
It's going to be so valuable for the young service designers, especially in India, because people keep thinking there's no service design work happening in India. It's all outside India, but I think there are a lot of people doing fantastic work here, and you guys are definitely one of them.